think what's really important for us to understand about relationships, really just generally speaking, is the way we show up in relationships as adults is so conditioned, it's programmed by our earliest relationships. And very few of us had the level of care or attunement that we needed in childhood. So ultimately what we did is we learned how we had to relate to keep the connections that were available to us. So really simply, the way most of us are functioning in adulthood in relationship is really through learned behaviors, habitual actions. We like to say here in the States that we're wearing a mask or we're playing a role. Really simply, we're not showing up authentically. So when we have that piece of awareness, then we could create the opportunity to begin to reconnect with who we authentically are, so that then, of course, we could begin to create more authentic relationships.
Hey, leuk dat je kijkt of luistert naar Vibestalk. Ik hoop dat je het te gek vindt wat wij doen. Maar als je ons wil steunen, join dan the movement. Word member. En je kan je dan ook gaan verbinden met gelijkgestemde mensen. Wat op een zaal gebeurt en waar ook heel veel informatie met elkaar wordt gedeeld. Het is fantastisch om te zien, want zo kunnen we samen bouwen aan een mooiere wereld. Ga ervoor naar onze website www.univibes.nl. En zoals je misschien kunt zien, ik ben er vanavond niet. Maar vriend van onze show, Baptiste Paap, is er vanavond. En dan gaat niemand minder dan Dr. Nicole LePera gaat die interviewen. En het wordt echt waanzinnig. Dus deel deze video, like hem en abonneer je ook meteen even op ons kanaal. En wil je op de hoogte blijven, schrijf je in voor onze nieuwsbrief. Ook via onze website www.univibes.nl. En onze website is vernieuwd, dus doe even een kijkje. Dankjewel. En dan wens ik je bij deze heel veel plezier bij Baptiste Paap. Vibestalk Global.
Hello everyone, I am so freaking excited today. Our guest is Nicole LePera, also known as the holistic psychologist. She has over 8 million followers on Instagram. She wrote the New York Times bestseller, How to Do the Work. And today we will talk about her new book, How to Be the Love You Seek. And I am so freaking excited about this book because it's completely aligned with a film and a book that I produced, The Power of the Heart. There's heart stuff in it. There's talk about the soul, authentic power. Authentic power is when your personality starts to serve the energy of the soul. And all these concepts are in this book. And Nicole, it's so good to see you. I feel like we're kindred spirits. And I just want to know, first of all, how have you been?
Well, thank you for asking me. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited for this conversation with you here today, Mark. I've been all over the place in terms of energetically having, put the better part of the last 2 years into the book, sharing so much vulnerably about my own relational journey in the book. And then, of course, releasing the book and promoting the book as I've spent my time over the past several months has been quite an emotional roller coaster. So I'm on the other side of it, regrounding myself, and just really grateful for these opportunities that I have to connect with your community.
So, Nicole, so for our audience here in Europe, can you share a little bit about who you are, about your background?
The way that I currently work now, and as some of you or many of you may know me as the holistic psychologist, has really been a shift in terms of my own healing journey and the way that I really understand our human experience. And after several years into having quite a successful private practice, I was living in Philadelphia at the time, so in the Northeast here in the States. And what I had started to feel was really disempowered with the work that I was doing after that. At that point, I had seen many different clients for significant periods of time, some for well over a couple of years. And what I kept hearing was how stuck all of my clients continued to feel. And it really did seem that no amount of insight or awareness or really nothing that we could have done in our session time was really giving the clients that I was working with the tools to create the changes that they were looking for. So I did, as I think a lot of us do, I was really hungry to answer the question of, well, why? Why can I be so trained to to be the helping professional in the room, and yet why can I feel so unimpactful? And thankfully, my research took me online and really took me down several rabbit holes. I eventually did land on all of the beautiful work that Heart Math is really kind of breaking ground and putting out for all of us in terms of the power of the heart. Before I got even there, I really was met with just the power of the human body, the nervous system in particular. And that information is really what allowed me to understand our experience more holistically, incorporating the body, and then, of course, to begin to work as I now do as the holistic psychologist.
Yes. Yes, a few years ago, I interviewed John Gray. I don't know. He wrote "Men are from Mars, women are from Venus." I think his name is John Gray. I'm not sure. And it's a classical book. You must have heard of the book, I think. And yes. I noticed that a lot of people throughout their life, they've read a lot of books on relationships and how to have successful relationships. But in your book, I think the key is that we have to align our personality with our soul. Is that really one of the main keys to have a successful relationship?
I think what's really important for us to understand about relationships, really just generally speaking, is the way we show up in relationships as adults is so conditioned, it's programmed by our earliest relationships. And very few of us had the level of care or attunement that we needed in childhood. So ultimately what we did is we learned how we had to relate to keep the connections that were available to us. So really simply, the way most of us are functioning in adulthood in relationship is really through learned behaviors, habitual actions. We like to say here in the States that we're wearing a mask or we're playing a role. Really simply, we're not showing up authentically. So when we have that piece of awareness, then we could create the opportunity to begin to reconnect with who we authentically are, so that then, of course, we could begin to create more authentic relationships.
And is the key then there to peel off all the layers of who we not are because of all the social conditioning that we went through?
Yes, I love that. Even you using that language of peeling. I like to think of an onion analogy of creating space first to observe. And I really want to emphasize that point. Seeing all of the habitual ways that we act in the world, especially in our relationships. For a lot of us, that step of the journey, before we peel back the layers and begin to make new, more authentic choices, that step of awareness for many of us can be really relieving of some of the shame that we might be carrying as we continue to repeat dysfunctional cycles. With many of us, much like my clients, having the awareness or the willingness or desire to do better or do differently, yet not having the ability to show up differently. So within that space of awareness, I do think we are able to relieve some of the shame that we feel that something is wrong with us, and then, of course, give ourselves the opportunity to begin to show up more authentically.
Nicole, in the book, you also talk about your own relationships. First, you're very open about it. You were not gay, and then I think you turned gay. You talk about a lot of your relationships, maybe not all of them, but it seemed that at one point you started to realize that the common denominator, that every time it didn't work out, you were in that relationship.
Yes. So so I had been in relationships. I think I had started dating probably around 16 years old. And I'm what we call here in the States, at least, a serial monogamous, meaning I always happen to find myself into a relationship. And before not too long, after finding a new relationship, I would typically start to feel really emotionally disconnected. And then before long, I would start to voice those complaints, usually, of course, assigning the blame for why I'm so emotionally disconnected to the partner that I had picked or the person that I was in a relationship with. And after having cycled through that several times, getting to the point where, okay, this relationship is now ended, clearly because I picked the wrong person who's not able to connect with me emotionally. So onwards, I would go to try to find a more perfect partner who would give me that emotional connection I was looking for. And it took me several cycles of that, initially always feeling like it was someone else creating that emotional disconnection, before I got curious and even entertained the possibility that I was that common denominator, that I was playing some role, likely even outside of my own awareness, not even present to the fact that I was contributing to that distance, though I was. And what I come to realize that patterning for me, much like all of us, began in my own childhood when I didn't have the emotional attunement or the emotional connection that I needed from my primary caregivers. So I was creating or almost repeating an emotional distance, yet until I understood the role I was playing, I was holding everyone else responsible and then just continued to recreate that same cycle.
Yes. In the book, you talk about the importance of our childhood because it has a big impact on our relationships later on in life. Can you speak a little bit on that?
So this childhood that I'm kind of describing that many of us repeat, I mean, we are in a stage of two things really in childhood. We're in a stage of discovering about ourselves, our human body, our human experience. And we are in a stage of learning, right? Learning how to navigate this human experience, learning how necessarily over time to meet our needs. And so really it's in those early childhood environments, in our relationships in particular, because in human infancy, when we're born, we are dependent on another individual to care for us, which is why our kind of major environment in child is really within a relationship. And within those early relationships, based on what was maybe directly or indirectly said about us, becomes over time the things that we think about ourselves or believe about ourselves. Similarly, in terms of our emotions, the way in which our emotions were tended to, were soothed in childhood, or if you had, like me, a lack of that emotional attunement, we'll repeat those same patterns, that same relationship with our emotions into our adulthood. And then in terms of our self-expression, this kind of piece of our authenticity, the things in childhood that we were taught, again, directly or indirectly, that were validated, the things that were rewarded, certain aspects of ourself that allowed us to remain connected, we continued to repeat those things. And then everything else, things that maybe we were shamed, maybe we were told we were too dramatic, or we were told for other reasons not to be in a certain experience. And before long, the way we relate and connect to other people was directly impacted by that learning, by what we had to turn up or down in terms of our self-expression to keep those relationships. So really, our entire way of being is imprinted and impacted by the way in which our earliest caregivers related to us. And then we rely on those habits and patterns into our adulthood, which is, again, why very few of us feel authentically connected to ourselves and, of course, to those that we're in relationship with.
In the book, you speak on the fact that our relationships are determined by the programs and the patterns in our subconsciousness. Is the foundation for the patterns in our subconsciousness, is that laid in the 7 years of the childhood, the first 7 years?
So we now know, very gratefully and thankfully validated by science, that our brain and our body, through what is called neuroplasticity, can change at any time throughout our life. So there is no kind of too late, though we also know that those early developmental years, typically through birth to age 7 or 8, are a highly sensitive period where our brain in that learning stage that I referenced earlier is doing a lot of that. There's a saying, neurons that fire together, wire together. So in that early learning stage, there's a lot of that firing and wiring that's happening that then becomes the unconscious or the subconscious habits that we repeat in what a lot of us call our autopilot. They quite literally are neurons that have fired and wired together consistently enough over time that they have now formed pathways in our mind that will become the pathways that we rely on, of course, until we create new ones. I want to continue to emphasize that there is no too late period. While, yes, a lot of learning happened when we were very young, just like that onion analogy we were just talking about, Mark, we can unlearn those habits and create new pathways in our mind at any time.
So it is possible. And how do we do that?
So I will always simplify the process of change, if you will, into 2 steps. And the first step is what we've more or less been talking about thus far in our conversation, which is becoming aware. Becoming conscious is a word I often use, right? Seeing these habits that for the large majority of us have been living outside of our awareness for probably the better part of our entire life. So seeing those habitual ways, whether it's the habitual thoughts or narratives running through our mind, whether it's the habitual feelings that overwhelm us, or just this habitual way, like that mask or that role that I was talking about earlier, the habitual way I've learned to show up and relate to other people.
So creating new habits, and can you give an example of that?
Oh, so creating new habits, and again, even just beginning foundationally with the body, I think the large majority of us as adults, the most beneficial foundational habit that we can create for ourselves is a habit of learning how to pay attention to the physical body in which we live. Because where our attention goes throughout the large majority of our day is not to our body. We're distracted with the thoughts in our mind. Some of us are endlessly distracted by the environment around us. Maybe we're hyper attentive or attuned to other people in the environment around us so that we can show up and care for them in some way. But where are we not paying attention to? Ourselves, beginning in our body. So I think that is a foundational habit that many of us can build into our lives by first becoming aware of where our attention is. So even as I'm chatting here right now, I can invite listeners just to take this as an opportunity to notice, right? Where has your attention been in the last just minute or two? Have you been listening to what I'm saying? Are you able to feel, maybe you're on a walk, are you able to feel yourself physically present in your body while you're listening? Or maybe you're just tuning back in now that I, voice this at the listeners. Maybe you're lost in thought somewhere else. And in that moment now we can give ourselves the opportunity to reconnect with our body, to tune in, to notice how our muscles feel, to notice our breath, to notice our heartbeat, things that are always sending sensations to our brain outside of our awareness, but we're not paying attention to it. So I can't say enough about the foundational habit of all the different ways that we can reconnect with our body, though I can leave listeners with that suggestion to reconnect with our body, because we are missing a lot of important information that our brain is taking into consideration if we're not connected to all of those different signals.
And what is really the best way to connect with our body?
I think the best way to connect with our body is any way in which it feels most comfortable initially. Because within our bodies, for a lot of us, is a lot of overwhelming emotions. Is the lack, like very few of us, much like myself, like I was sharing, I didn't have that level of attunement. I didn't have safety. I didn't have the presence of a grounded caregiver to be with me in my physical experience or in my emotional experience. So being overwhelmed and near constantly without that support and comfort that I needed, for me, created a habit of disconnecting from my body. And then as I became aware, much like I'm describing to listeners, and became aware of how important the body is and all of this different information, I had this, okay, the body is important. I need to reconnect, right? I had that logically in my mind. When I went to reconnect with my body, what I was met with was all of that discomfort that I had been ignoring or distracting myself from for a very long time. So as quickly as I could say, just connect with your body, I'm really sensitive that for a lot of us, what's in our body is really overwhelming. And we don't yet have the resources to be able to be present to that overwhelming energy. So the way I began this whole journey was not, I think, traditionally what a lot of people imagine, right? Meditation. What do we think of when we think of, connect with my body? I'm going to go sit myself in a room, turn off all the lights, right? Shut down all the sounds, close my eyes, cross my legs, and have this moment of body reconnection. When I tried to do that, as I imagine is the case for a lot of listeners, I was met with racing thoughts. There was overwhelming sensations in my body. I was crawling out of my skin. And before I knew it, I was out of that meditation room as quickly as I entered. So for me, I began this practice not in that traditional sense. I began reconnecting with my body through gentle movement. When I was on a walk, right? Just like I offered the instruction for listeners, right? On my walk, I would notice where my attention was, and then I would take the opportunity to begin to pay attention to, as simple as it sounds, the feeling of my muscles contracting and expanding while I was walking around the block. Because for me, that felt a little more approachable because my body was doing something, if you will. It was on a walk than just sitting there in the presence of all of those overwhelming emotions. So I wanted to just kind of add the nuance here because I know I can, quickly share a suggestion, reconnect with your body. And I know for a lot of listeners, the body is the unsafest place to be, though we have to learn how to be present to our bodies so that we can release all of these emotions and reconnect, as you and I were agreeing, with the infinite power of the heart. We have to be able to reconnect and to tolerate all of those overwhelming sensations. So there's many other ways outside of, I think, traditionally what we think that we're supposed to do, if you will, that we can begin this journey of being in our bodies and being present to what's there.
So you are really talking about body regulation, you're talking about nervous system regulation, but I think the first step is, I think you need emotional awareness in order to do that, right?
You need to be. I really appreciate, Mark, how you're even bringing up this word emotional awareness. Yes. Because for me, we use the word emotion very commonly from a very young age, right? Yeah. How are you feeling? Emotions. I went through a training program for a near decade to become a clinical psychologist where, of course, there was lots of conversation about emotion and feelings, right? Emotions are what contributed to people's diagnoses. So I had to know how they felt and talk about them. I, however, didn't scientifically, and I'm a scientist at heart. I love to have the data to see kind of how it maps on my awareness or my understanding, my learning maps on. I like to see numbers in science. I did not know what emotions really were or where they were located, right? I had this idea that emotions were just this kind of like mental thing. I did not yet know that emotions are actually physiological energies in the body. They're hormones, they're neurotransmitters, they're stuff, I really want to simplify it, in our body. So this whole conversation, and when you're talking about, emotional awareness that then leads to emotional regulation, that then leads to emotional intimacy and connection, right? All of this stuff with emotions foundationally includes our body, our ability to be connected, our ability to be present, our ability to regulate and release all of these emotions and allow our body to return to homeostasis or peace and calm. So yes, all of this conversation is connected and built on the foundation of what is my body doing and how able is my body to navigate these emotions because they live in the body.
Yes, so the emotions live in the body, but what is the source of the emotions? Is it the soul or are it the experiences that we have?
So emotions, again, as energy, send us, emotions are messengers, if I really want to just simplify it. They're energies that contain information. Sometimes they contain information about the external environment, what's happening around us, how safe we are, if we're having an unmet need. Sometimes they carry information about what's happening internally, right? The deeper self, the authentic, the instinct, the intuition. So they can come from outside or inside, but ultimately they're messages. So becoming present to the messages. Now, this is where it gets a bit complicated. Some of the emotions that we're experiencing in our current day, in our current moment, and now, are colored not by what's happening now, but by what once happened. Because emotions aren't necessarily objective, meaning you and I can't sit in the same room, have the exact same experience, and take away or have the same emotional reaction. Likely we won't. And the many of us who have had siblings probably have met a lot of these moments where you have a different reaction than your siblings in which you're growing up, or you heard a narrative told in a different way that was your experience of something. So understanding again that emotions carry energy regardless of if they're from the past or from the present, then gives us the opportunity to determine where the information or how applicable the information or relevant the information is for the decision that I have to make now. But to answer your question, it can come from the outside. I'm receiving information from what's happening around me and how I'm experiencing that. And of course, it can also come from these deeper places of our intuition, of our authentic self, of our inner desires.
You say you're a scientist at heart, and in the book you say that there's scientific proof that we are souls and that the soul exists. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
So, for me, I was always seeking, like, where is the science of what makes us, the unique, being that each of us are. And that's where I kind of met the rabbit hole of all of the beautiful and empowering work that is being led by the HeartMath Institute in terms of the heart, and the energetic expression and power of all of those electromagnetic signals that are occurring. Again, just like I was sharing earlier, sending signals outside of ourselves, interacting with those around us, the environment around us, and receiving signals from the outside world. The heart is sending incredible coordinating messages to all of the physiological systems in our body, all of the emotional systems in our body. It's really a main regulator, our heart. So for me, if we were to want to scientifically localize where this authentic self is, this intuition, this inner guidance, I personally would absolutely locate it, kind of our major hub, if you will, of energetic expression, which I would term soul or spirit. I believe that is speaking and expressing through that very powerful organ that is our heart.
Yes, yeah. The HeartMath work is so important. The work of Roland McGrady, and in the HeartMath science, you see that, and they've done this in many laboratories all over the world. But the heart actually knows what is going to happen before the eyes can see it. And so they showed pictures to people, and when it was a very negative picture, the heart was beating in a certain tempo, and then when it was another picture, the heartbeat was different. So the heart knew what picture was going to be shown. And this is really interesting because in a way we could say that the heart is, and here's the connection with the soul, the seat of the soul, right? Where we receive the information from the soul or the field, whatever you would like to call it, and then it enters into our body. So there's a very important connection between our physical heart and, let's say, the spiritual soul, we could say. You say that everyone has their own specific soul. Everyone is unique in that way. How important is that information if you want to connect with your higher soul, and what is the impact on that in your relationships?
I think reconnecting with our authentic uniqueness is foundationally important in our relationships. I think that, a term, it's called interdependence. And simply what that means, and I have a whole chapter dedicated to in the book. Interdependence is the ability to be me, to be who I am, while still remaining connected to and in collaboration with you, who you are. And so I don't know if listeners have ever heard this saying. I don't know if it translates, but we have a saying here that we often refer to humans as interpersonal creatures, or we'll say that we're wired to connect with other people.
Yes.
And so that really highlights, in terms of our ancestry, how evolutionarily valuable it was for us as humans to have the ability to join together in groups. But it wasn't just joining together in groups where we become kind of group think, where we become a singular unit, where we all become the same with the same beliefs. We all do the same things, because a lot of then even just activities of daily living would get missed. If everyone was strong or, talented in one area, certain things wouldn't get done. Right? To have an operational community or group, we need someone that's talented in different things so that everything logistically can happen smoothly and life can continue. So simply there is such value. When we're saying we're connected, we're not saying I'm going to compromise, or like I was sharing earlier, wear a mask, play a role, be who you need me to be just to stay connected, because that actually weakens the group. It weakens group cohesion, harmony, it increases conflict. When we are all able to be who we are, that is the goal of a healthy, functioning relationship. So when we think about how important it is then for us as individuals, for some of us to discover at whatever age it is that we're awakening who it is that we are, but ultimately to be who we are doesn't just benefit ourselves, where we're able to live in greater flow, alignment, coherence, we're physically and emotionally healthier. We're actually creating a safer, secure, more functional, healthy environment that allows other people then to be who they are too. And that's really one of what I hope is a major takeaway of this book in particular, How to Be the Love You Seek, is again, back to those 2 steps of change, giving readers the opportunity to become aware of all of the habits that are coloring their relationships currently, or these masks or the roles that they're playing, all the unauthentic or inauthentic ways that they are showing up now, so that then they can make, peeling back all of the layers of that conditioning, the choice to do their part in showing up more authentically, because that's truly how I believe, again, you create the safety and the security for someone else to be who they really are. And that is how I personally, at least, would define what love is. It's the interdependent nature. It's me loving you enough to allow you to explore and be who you are, while I have that same gift and space to show up as I am. And then we have a coherent, harmonious, not without conflict and moments, of course, relationship, but we have a relationship that can work through those disagreements or those differing perspectives in any moment, and who can come back and keep the best interest of the group or the relationship top of mind.
So Nicole, you say in a way we are wired to have relationships, right? It's in our DNA. On the other hand, it seems that we first, before we are actually ready to be in a relationship, that we first have to do some inner work. When are we actually ready to enter a relationship?
So this question of readiness too, because whenever we enter and this, one of the major inspirations, honestly, Mark, for this book was hearing and living myself the experience of, with my first book, How to Do the Work, I talked a lot about all of these habits, these patterns, creating change. I was well on my journey. I was starting to feel good. I peeling back a lot of my own conditioning. And yet, having been in a relationship, or was in a relationship while I began my journey, I continued to still struggle in my relationships. I continue to see repeated patterns. So when I hear this idea of ready, I don't think that there is a timeline or a marker. Relationships will always, I think, bring up these parts of ourself that are the deepest rooted in terms of this earliest conditioning. So it's not to say that we have to get to a place where, certain things are the case so that we can engage, or else it'll be conflictual. I think relationships will carry challenge. I think awareness, though, empowers each of us to be a more grounded participant, right? Just becoming aware that we have these habits and patterns within our relationships as we're connecting with other people, I think gives us the opportunity to understand, accept, be with the challenge that will be present. And of course, then the tools to break some of those, as my subtitle says, right? Dysfunctional cycles that many of us carry.
Hey Kanje, sorry dat ik stoor tijdens de uitzending, maar ik heb een hele belangrijke mededeling. Want aanstaande zaterdag, dan is het zover. Dan geeft Marcel Messing een heel bijzonder event. Alle tickets waren heel snel uitverkocht, maar wij namens Univibes hebben het geregeld, hebben het voor elkaar gekregen dat er een livestream is. Zo kun je de hele dag volgen. Wil je bij je aanwezig zijn? Ga dan snel naar onze website www.univibes.nl. Heel veel mensen hebben het gedaan en dan gaan we zaterdag een hele mooie dag met elkaar beleven. En kun je in je gemak het rustig ook de volgende dag nog een keer nakijken of wat dan ook. Ga dan snel naar onze website univibes.nl voor deze hele bijzondere Marcel Messing live. Enjoy, deel 2.
Although safety is a state of being, that we can work on it. And I want to talk a little bit about the power of affirmations. I think you must be familiar with the work of Louise Hay, who founded Hay House. and affirmations were really important in her work. How powerful are affirmations if we want to create a state of safety?
Right. So again, while I just said, right, we can't just use affirmations or just think our way.
Yes.
I do agree, much like Louise Hay, that affirmations, mantras, new thoughts are path, if you will, part of the journey of change. Because all of those narratives of thoughts running through our head now, right? Just like I was talking about earlier, fired and wired, right? I've fired and wired these same interpretations of events for so long. That's now the narrative that runs through my mind. So if I want to change that, I have to do two things. Some of us miss the first step. The first step is I can't stop the old story in my mind. So whatever I want to affirm, right? If the narrative is I'm unworthy, I'm an imposter, right? I can't stop that narrative. So if anyone is listening and has that expectation that as soon as I become aware that I have an unhelpful narrative in my mind that I want to change, if we have the expectation that's going to immediately go away, we're going to set ourselves up for disappointment because all of that neuron firing and wiring pattern, it won't go away, right? We will see in our mind's eye, if you will, that same story of unworthiness or of we're an imposter or a fraud, whatever it is, somewhere down the line, it'll reappear again. So the first step of what we can do is not shame ourselves because it's back, right? It didn't work, this affirmation, I didn't change already. We can, though, remove our attention, stop firing that thought pattern. And then this is where affirmations come in. And now we can begin to lay the groundwork. So if I don't want to think I'm unworthy, again, I'm, of course, really simplifying this. I can begin to affirm I'm worthy. So now I'm beginning that firing and wiring, right, pattern of a new narrative that if I practice that consistently enough over time, just like I practice how unworthy I am consistently over time, now I can begin to lay down that new neural network. But as I was saying, right, just a few minutes ago, that isn't the whole story because what has happened, right, I can't just think my way out of states of being, emotional states. That's where I have to kind of connect this process of rewiring the mental narrative, just like I described, moving attention, affirming or using a new mantra or affirmation with the body or the physical work that we've been talking about.
So we can do it, but we have to do it through the body in a way. I mean, we have to feel it. When we say the affirmation, we also have to feel it, not so I am worthy, and not actually feeling it.
We have to, if we can generate the feeling, right, believing it to be true, right? If I can say I'm worthy and then give myself even a moment of being like, yes, I believe that, I feel worthy in this minute, that's beautiful. And if we can't, because we have just spent probably a lifetime validating how unworthy we are and all of these unworthy feelings in our body, then the body work I can do in that moment is not to expect that I know even what it feels like. I might not even know how it feels to feel worthy. I've never felt worthy, right? So how would I know how to generate that feeling? Then the body work becomes, right, affirming I'm worthy, pulling my attention, affirming I'm worthy, that first step of the journey. Now I can show up in action, right? How would you imagine? Maybe you even have a model or a mentor, someone who you do believe is worthy. You show up in action. Maybe it means taking care of yourself. Maybe it means doing an act of self-care. Maybe it means accepting your emotion. So some of us, right, we won't believe that we're worthy. What we can do, though, in terms of that embodiment or the physical practice, we can create a new habit in action of treating myself as if I already am worthy, even if I don't believe it in that moment. And then the more we practice, right, wiring this new narrative with the behavior, within action, almost as if I'm just going through the motions. Because remember, I don't believe myself to be worthy. So here I am almost rolling my eyes, right, treating myself as if I'm worthy. What will happen over time, if I keep weakening that old narrative and building a new one and acting as if, then somewhere down the line, we will be able to feel as though we are this new thought.
So in a way you're saying it could be helpful to fake it till you make it.
in a lot. And I think this is an important part, Mark, because a lot of us wait to be inspired or to feel a certain way before we do a new thing, right? Before we take that second step, as I broke down change earlier, right? We become aware of what's not working and we want to feel motivated to do something new, right? We wait for the feeling to do. And so, yes, in a lot of ways, I'm saying a version of don't wait for that feeling, right? Build those new behaviors, make those new choices. Don't judge yourself for not feeling like it or not being motivated enough or not immediately feeling like you're worthy, just to go back to that example. Understanding that beliefs and what we're talking about here, this rewiring of our subconscious mind, takes a long time. We've been wiring it for a lifetime to get it as strong as it is now. So yes, to some extent, what we are talking about is building that bridge from insight into action, even before we feel like doing it, or even before we feel the results of the action that we want to create.
I think it's so wonderful that we are able to create these new patterns and to create, neurons that fire together, wire together. But also there's a chapter in the book, Unlocking the Power of Your Heart, which I think is really fascinating. First of all, when we are more connected to our hearts, when we are in a state of heart coherence, and this is a state where we can experience, where we experience love and gratitude, our heart is becoming bigger in a way, and it's sending signals to the brain, and our left and right brain, they open up and they start to work together more, and they can actually measure this. So the more loving we become, the more love we feel, the more intelligent we become. And we all recognize this, right? When we sometimes had to do a test at university or in school, and we really studied hard. And during the test, because we were nervous, we could not come up with the information. And 2 hours later, we're back home and we're like, I knew that, but I couldn't get to that information. And that's because you're not in a state of heart coherence. So it's also important for problem solving within relationships. The more we are in a state of heart coherence, the easier we can solve the conflicts or the challenges we have in relationships. So I love it, the fact that HeartMath is teaching us heart coherence, ways to get into heart coherence. You have the heart lock-in. Can you speak a little bit about all the things that we can learn from the HeartMath science when it comes to creating heart coherence?
I love you bringing up this idea of our ability to think, right? To think clearly, to think groundedly, to think about new possibilities in any given moment. Because absolutely, when we are in that survival mode, as I've been kind of terming it all along, when we're not in that state of coherence, we do lose our ability, which is why so many of us, and I'll just speak from my own lived experience, I can't tell you how many times, right, I've come to the awareness that something that I do in a stressful moment, whether it's saying and doing, hurtful things that I don't mean, or whether it's disconnecting and pushing someone away, giving them the cold shoulder that I really want to stay connected to, right? I'm clear that I don't want to show up in that way in my relationship. Yet what I'm also clear, and I've lived the experience of, is there are moments where in a heightened emotion, this beautiful grounded statement that I can make in front of all of you listening, that is, those behaviors aren't helpful. I want to stop them. I even have all the tools. I wrote books on all the things I could do in the moment to regulate myself and to not, right, say and do hurtful things or not push someone away. Yet in that moment, it's almost as if I lost access to all of this beautiful information, because that is quite literally what happens when we are dysregulated. This is why we continue to repeat, we continue to repeat behaviors that don't serve us, even if we do have that awareness that, I want to stop it. So being in a state of coherence, not only in terms of our cognitive world, able to think clear or imagine and action toward future outcomes, physiologically or physically, it coordinates not only just the hemispheres of our brain, Baptiste, like you were saying so beautifully, it coordinates all of the systems in our body. Our immune system becomes more resilient. We're healthier. Our nervous system becomes more resilient. We're better able to stay regulated through stressful experiences, right? When we're in that state of coherence, like I was sharing earlier, we're able to not view the person in front of me as a threat because I'm activated, as another individual who's different than me. with different perspectives, might have different wants or needs in this moment. And then I could negotiate, like I was sharing earlier, we're harmonious. We can negotiate. I can hold my best interest and perspective in mind. I can be curious about someone else's perspective or their interest. And then together we can negotiate instead of trying to battle, win, domineer, one up, and everything else that we do very naturally, even to those that we love the most when we're viewing them as a threat. So this state of coherence that I'm describing is, in my opinion, how we empower ourselves to create such incredible change and health and emotional resilience. And again, safety and security internally for ourselves. And because we know now, right, as we've been talking about, how powerful our heart is sending now those signals of safety out. Right now, my coherence can, like a domino, likely impact the coherence of everyone else around me. And this is how I believe that us as individuals can begin to empower ourselves to create quite collective, global even shift in energy toward coherence, away from incoherence and stress and conflict and war and everything else that then culturally and happens within our societies when we're viewing those around us as our enemy.
Yes, in a way you're saying that, and this is what Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. And maybe we could also say, be the change you want to see in your relationship, right?
Yes. So unlike, and again, we can bring this beautifully full circle. Yeah. I spent a lot of time doing the opposite, right? Yeah. Saying, no, you change. You just show up differently. Stop doing that. Start doing this. Yes. And it's not to say, again, that we're not in relationship with other people that, of course, are playing a role in our dynamics. But when we begin to refocus and say, okay, well, what am I doing? How can I show up more grounded, more peaceful, more coherent? Some of the time, if not most of the time, what we thought was the problem they were causing goes away. We resolve it because by then we've seen the role that we've been contributing, not all of the time though, of course. So I do want to leave room too for everyone who's thinking, wow, it doesn't necessarily mean like maybe we just are in the relationship with the wrong person. Yes, of course. And as we become more coherent, you know what has also happened? We become more connected to and in trust of our intuition. So we can get more affirmed and sure that, you know what, this isn't the person then or a relationship for me.
Yes. And I think it's this, what you just said reminds me of what Dr. Maya Angelou said. I had the privilege to interview her. The late Dr. Maya Angelou, I think she's a monument in the United States. She was the American Poet Laureate. She was a civil rights activist. She was a best-selling author. And I interviewed her about The Power of the Heart, my film, and she said, if you really want to live from the heart, the most important virtue that you have to develop is courage. And if you look at the origins of the word courage, it is derived from Latin, the word cor, which means heart, or in French even courage, which also has the word cœur, heart in it. So how important is courage if we want to be the love that we seek?
Oh, I mean, I think, again, because the large majority of us, the habits we learn that we're repeating because they're familiar and safe, aren't being ourselves, right? Because we had to modify. We had to squash or suppress certain aspects. So I would go as far to say courage is foundationally part of the journey for the large majority of us because we didn't have the safety and security to just feel comfortable being who we are. Yes. So as we become more aware and then make the choice to express more aspects of ourselves, whether it's sharing our perspective, whether it's sharing our emotional experience, whether it's just being who we are, however that is in that moment, I would say that for the large majority of us, that's a very vulnerable new action. So courage is so foundationally, that's back to this, even like we were just talking about, right? Don't wait to feel unafraid to do the new thing because anything that's new is going to challenge our nervous system, is going to feel overwhelming, scary, and might not be something we do if we listen to those cues. So anticipating that new things, even if the new thing is sharing a bit more of myself with someone else, that will indeed take courage. It will be a courageous thing. It will feel vulnerable. It will feel new. There might even be fears and worries that we now are present to. And so it is so important, like I was sharing, right, to do it anyway, right? To find them the safety and support, and maybe even the safe relationships where, you can be assured that you will be received. I mean, this was one of the major reasons why I have in existence what was once an idea of my membership. Can I create a safe space away from social media where individuals from all over the world, wherever they're tuning in on their healing journeys, can begin to experiment with using these tools and be who they are?
Yes. And you also mentioned something really important, vulnerability. Brené Brown said, what makes you vulnerable also makes you beautiful. But especially, and this is the case for men like me, we are afraid to show our vulnerability, especially to women, because, we think, oh, women are going to think that we're weak and we're not real men. What are your thoughts on that we don't really have a culture, especially for men, where it's okay to show our vulnerability?
100%. I think cultural influences, beliefs, genders, religious. I mean, there are so many spheres of influence or things that impact how we're raised, what the environment is like, what we're taught is appropriate or not appropriate. So yes, I do think that there are different aspects of our conditioning, some of which that kind of fall along gender lines that greatly then impact how we continue to relate to ourselves, our emotional worlds in particular. And I know even, outside of gender, a lot of it is generational. I mean, I come from parents who were raised in a generation where there was not even a conversation. It's more recently than not where parenting and children and childhood is talked about in the context of emotions and nervous system wellness and all of this wired to connect conversation, right, that you and I have been talking about. So regardless of the gender, there were a lot of people raised by these older generations that would have gotten somewhat of a similar message, that emotions are inconsequential, dramatic, to be avoided at all costs. But of course, I do think that there are certain groups and belief systems that 100% continue to impact as adults. And my hope, though, is as these conversations continues, as these tools, continue to be distributed and utilized, that we will see what I believe is to be true, that we are more similar than dissimilar at our core, and that emotions are a part of our human experience, regardless of how you identify, and that the large majority of us as adults are ill-equipped to tend to our own emotions without shame, giving ourselves the possibility, of course, then to create new opportunities or choices to navigate our bodies, where our emotions live, create the stress and emotional resilience that we need so that not only we can be ourselves, right, we can connect with other people that are themselves, and we can live in this coherent and cooperative and harmonious state.
One of the biggest takeaways from your book, at least for me, is that if we want to be the love that we seek, is that we have to understand who we really are, which is not the body, but the soul. The body is where we live temporarily. And I think it's really great if you study near-death experiences. People who have this classical near-death experience, they see the tunnel of light, but they also have an experience that they are unconditional love, that they are infinite intelligence, that time does not exist, that they can be anywhere at the same time with their consciousness. And it seems to be that when we are in the body, it is almost like a time machine. As long as we are in the body, time exists, right? But as soon as you have the out-of-body experience or the near-death experience, you're out of the body and all of a sudden time does not exist. So did you study near-death experiences in order to help you get convinced that we are actually souls and that we are more than just a body?
I absolutely went down the rabbit hole of any sort of, I studied and will continue to always open myself up to new research and things that I don't yet know in terms of all different states of consciousness. So near-death experiences, I 100% went down that rabbit hole. I studied a lot too in terms of quantum science, quantum physics, just kind of the energies of the universe, similarly trying to kind of locate a way to think about and describe the human experience. But yes, I found myself very fascinated by individuals who have near-death experiences, how similar their stories are when they come back.
I think it's really interesting, if it's really true that we are unconditional love, infinite intelligence, and that time does not exist in that realm, in a way, I mean, it's almost a contradiction. The body or the personality seems to be very limited, rational, logical, linear, and then we are, in essence, we are an infinite wisdom, infinite intelligence. How do you see that relationship? How can those two work together?
I think that they can work together by holding space for the likely reality that is kind of our current circumstance, as well as holding space for the reality that we don't yet know all of the reality.
Yes.
Right? What I'm meaning when I say that, it can happen, I think, and what I'm seeing shifting to collectively is a conversation around, even like you offered earlier, which is research I'm fascinated with, right? This idea of the heart is predicting the pictures, right? The fact that we now can have conversations that honor that there is an extrasensory perceptual system. Listeners might have heard it referred to as a sixth sense, right? Of course, we have our 5 typical senses, what I can see, touch, taste, hear, etc., right? Though now it's becoming quite universal to say there's other sensory systems, right? Some of us get visions. Some of us hear like, kind of ideas or a voice, if you will, in our mind. So it's so interesting. And I think this is even the possibility of having a conversation that there is something about the human experience where we are able to sense, like the heart was doing in that research example, right? The heart got messages from where we don't know yet, though it knew that this was going to be an upsetting picture. How did it know, right? So I see this conversation that we can begin to have a conversation and explore the possibility that there are aspects of our experience that we don't yet know, like a higher consciousness, like you're sharing, like a place where we go to where we are in like unconditional love. So I don't think we have all of the answers to scientifically describe how all of it works, though I think the more we can hold space for it to coexist as we explore, feel our way, or even just live into this new version of our energetic reality. I'm seeing, the reason why I offered the conversation continuing is I'm seeing that to be the trajectory that humanity is going. And I'm very hopefully along for the ride and very interested, which is why I said I'm open and no, I will continue probably to learn as science evolves, as we have access to new information. I love learning. It's how I even was able to update, if you will, my theory and practice from the more traditional way that I once was working when I began the conversation with you to holistically now how I am. And I'm well open to the possibility that you might speak to me 10 years from now, and there might be a whole different conversation that we're having in terms of our human experience, because we are evolving creatures. And there is a lot that science can't necessarily quantify, though that we're beginning, again, as a collective to lean into the knowing that there is something else that's happening here.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So you're saying we should keep researching and we should stay hungry for new information. Nicole, I think everyone here in the Netherlands and Belgium and other parts of Europe should really read your book. I love it. It's such a helpful book. Is there something you would like to leave us with?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Baptiste, for taking your time to chat with me, to connect with me. I love anyone who loves to dive down the rabbit hole of the science as much as I do. I want to thank all of you for tuning in. I did have the opportunity to visit the Netherlands, like a year and a half ago now. And it's just such a beautiful country, such an amazing community. So I definitely want to shout out the Netherlands. It's just being my people in alignment. And I want to celebrate and continue, as I often do, to celebrate everyone who listens to conversations like this, information like this, who is on their own awakening journey. Again, I'm getting chills as I'm hearing myself say this, because it is so inspiring. And I'm just so honored to be as difficult as I know aspects of our human experience and our current circumstances can be. I'm so hopeful for the direction that we're all going in together. And I'm just so honored to be a part of and welcomed into communities like yours. So thank you all.
Oh, thank you so much. Nicole, if people want to know more about you and if they want to follow you online, where can they find you?
Yes, absolutely. So however it is you consume social media, there is an account, The Holistic Psychologist, with some version of that as the handle. It all began on the Instagram account. So obviously come check us out, the.holistic.psychologist. There's a TikTok account, an X account, a YouTube channel, The Holistic Psychologist. So all of that for free, accessible content, an incredible community where these conversations are happening day in and day out. I have a website, theholisticspsychologist.com, where you can just get general information on all 3 of the books that I now have out, as well as on my global membership Self-Healer Circle.
No, Nicole, it was a real joy and a real privilege to be able to compare notes with you. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, sharing so much wonderful insights. We hope to see you in the Netherlands anytime soon. And again, everyone, please, people, read this book. It will really help you to have better and more powerful relationships. Thank you so much.